Welcome, everyone. It is finally time for Tim Wyatt and our 4 series of Academy Sophia. We are leading up to Halloween with 4 Fridays on death. It is so wonderful to have him here with us. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest before we get started. He is the one and only Tim Wyatt. He's an esoteric writer, lecturer, researcher, and organizer. He's a broadcast and print journalist for half a century. He's been doing what he does, and he's won awards for his plays and TV documentaries. He has produced numerous TV films, and currently he writes for various esoteric publications worldwide. We have featured Tim here on this channel before. We've had him actually here at the house. I'm a big fan of this beautiful soul. He is the author of more than 50 books, and our focus tonight is going to be one of your favorites. Going to be Everyone's Book of the Dead. Over 50 books, including Cycles of Eternity, an overview of the ageless wisdom, distributed to more than 40 countries. As an international lecturer for the Theosophical Society and other organizations, Tim travels widely across Europe, and he is the founder of the School of Applied Wisdom. That should sound familiar to you. Based in Leeds, and he also helps to run the Leeds Theosophical Society. Tim has been a lifelong student of esoteric ideas and occult science and is a dedicated explorer of consciousness. And he's a lover of the natural world and lives in Yorkshire with his cat, Electra. Welcome, Tim Wyatt, to the stage.
Thank you for that very effusive welcome, Anne, as always. Thank you. Much appreciated.
Well, I am just really tickled to have you. And I know we've been talking about this is coming. It's a 4-series set that we're doing with Tim on death. And let me tell you what we're going to be doing before we launch into this one. This Friday, this show, we're going to be taking a look at the attitudes to death. Death is something that's going to happen to us. Death is an absolute. We're going to be talking about death, the death and dying. Now, next Friday, we're going to be moving forward to talking about what happens after we die. What happens after we leave the physical? After death states is our focus next Friday. Then our third Friday with Tim, we're going to be moving on to something very important, reincarnation and karma, the balance, the cycles. We're going to be talking about that with him. And to wrap it up right before Halloween, we'll be talking about the evidence, the proof of reincarnation. And hopefully Tim will spend some time with us on spooks and specters and Mayavirupa and astral shells and all of that. Does that sound pretty good, Tim?
That sounds like it covers most of the bases, although no doubt we'll find some new ones as well during the course of our talks.
I am so glad to have you here. And we're doing it in a style, I really prefer this. It's more of a conversation. Tim is still the focal point here, but the conversation will take place where we can actually break it up rather than just a talking head and have a conversation with each other. I also highly encourage you, the viewer, to ask your questions, and then we can follow them up in the next series. This is the very beginning of Academy Sophia, which is a different way of learning these ancient teachings, a much more relaxed and accessible way. So as we can get started, I'd like to toss over the entire floor to you, Tim.
We have a very unhealthy view of death in the West, by and large, most people. It's changing, but by and large, because most people have an entirely materialistic view of the world, i.e., they see things in terms of the physical fabric of the world themselves and the universe. They don't accept that the human being has more subtle parts to them, subtle bodies, invisible envelopes. And they don't also agree that there are non-physical states of reality, which there are. Now, if you believe that all you see is all you get, of course you're going to be frightened about death, because at the end of it all, consciousness is withdrawn, good night Vienna, and all that awaits is an eternity of oblivion. If you don't believe in the existence of a soul and something that survives physical death, then you're going to be frightened about death. And I have to say that my researches in recent years have been colored by the attitudes of people around me and people I've been close to about death. Often people only start to think about it when it's approaching, when they've been diagnosed with some terminal condition, or when they get to a very extreme age and they know that the Grim Reaper with his scythe is coming to get them very, very, very soon. So it's only then that people start to address the issue. But death is so intimately entwined with life that we shouldn't ignore it. Although if you bring it up in polite conversation somewhere, at the dinner table or in the pub or on the street, people will say one thing to you. They'll say, "Oh, you're being very morbid." It's something that has to be kept in the closet. It's like a kind of a forbidden practice, which has to be kept under lock and key because people choose not to explore it. However, things are changing and attitudes to death are not what they were when I was born some years ago. Then I think that this was a Christian country and people, by and large, bought into the Christian view of death, which is that, yes, you have a soul that survives death, but it goes to some celestial waiting room for eternity until something rather unspecified happens then. But all the traditions around the world throughout history have spoken about this notion of cycles of life. And that's why I called my first book in the recent series Cycles of Eternity, because it shows that everything is subject to cycles. Why does everything go through cycles? Well, because that's the process by which all kingdoms of nature, all entities in the universe survive, and more importantly, how they evolve and grow and develop. Death is just part of the cycle. We're born, we grow, we reach to a state of maturity, we begin to decline, and then the physical form dies, and the inner portions of us, whatever we are, survives on the inner planes.
I wanted to ask a personal question here. When you were younger, were you afraid of death? Did you have a comprehensive look at it? Were you afraid? Were you curious?
I was very curious. Every Sunday afternoon, my parents and I, we lived in a small village not far from where I live now. And we used to go out on walks in the fields before they built houses on them. And there were many small churches because Yorkshire had been a particularly religious place, especially amongst the various Protestant sects like the Methodists and the Baptists and the Congregationalists. And there are loads of these churches. And I used to love to walk around the graveyards and read the inscriptions on the graves. And I used to ask my parents, why did this person die at 6 months old? And why did this man here live to the age of 93? And they said, I don't know. And I asked the priest at the church and I asked my teachers. No one could answer these questions. And so the next development was when I was about 8 years old. And I was playing football in the school playground with my friends. And suddenly something made me just withdraw from this game. And I went over and leant on the wall. And I had this overwhelming feeling that I'd been here before, not in that playground, not with these children, but I'd been on this earth before. And it was an overwhelming feeling, which at the time I kept to myself. But throughout my whole childhood and since then, I've always believed in the survival of something at the core of us, our souls, if you want to call it that, which survives physical death, because one life on this earth makes no logical sense, either esoterically or in any other way. What can you learn in one life? If the purpose of life is to evolve, what can you learn in one life, especially if you die at a few hours old?
Do you feel, though, that somehow was it the Victorians? When did we stop looking at death as part of life, as natural as birth? When did we, in the Western world, all of a sudden act like it was something that was never going to happen?
I think attitudes began to change as society began to change, probably from about 250 years ago when the first vestiges of the Industrial Revolution appeared, and they increased massively during the 19th century. The influence of the church declined throughout the 19th century and much of the 20th century. And so there was a kind of a vacuum. And people have become so imbued with this materialistic view of a mechanical clockwork universe that they saw themselves as nothing more than machines. And so I think this divorced them from any sense of a spiritual identity underneath the physical identity or within the physical identity. So I think this is when it started to change. Before that, everybody had just bought into the religious view that, if you're good, you go to heaven. If not, you go to the other place and get tormented by some guy with a tail for,
forever.
Ever.
Yeah, forever. Yeah. All eternity, because you made a mistake. Okay, Tim, then let me ask you, why are humans fascinated, absolutely consumed with the paranormal? Is this some kind of way for us to not only enjoy the thrill of the scare, but actually maybe find comfort that there is something more than just the physical world?
Well, I think it's almost a vicarious way of people accepting the fact that there are hidden realms and hidden entities. People want to believe this. And if you look at spiritualism, for example, which became a very, very big thing in America in the mid 19th century and reached an absolute peak of popularity after the American Civil War, in which 600,000 men predominantly had been killed. Mothers, daughters, wives wanted to know what had happened to their men. And so this was why there was an interest in it. But when it happens, it's happening at a time of massive industrialization, building railroads, conquering new lands, building infrastructure, steelworks, and all the trappings of modern society. So in some ways, it could be seen as a kind of reaction against that. You'll note that people like the Romantic poets, Wordsworth and Keats and others, they railed against the modern world, against railways and things, because they thought they were driving human beings too far away from their natural habitat, which is the natural world. And so I think this is where these attitudes started to kick in. And since then, we've had more industrialization, more mechanization. Obviously, now we're in the digital age, which has driven us in some ways even further away. But I think it shows that people have an innate hunger to know that there are realms and entities beyond themselves and that something survives death.
Do you think that because now we can push a button and actually see the other side of the world, we get real-time information, we can see other cultures, other societies? Before, it used to be regional, where we had the same radio station, the same newspaper, the same TV shows. Now that we can see, do you think that we're beginning as this humanity together, are we beginning to see the bigger picture? Do you think that as we're moving forward to be able to understand, because I always say this on this channel, that if we can only understand death and get our head around that, we can learn the meaning of life. What do you think the internet has done for us to get more ideas about where we're going and who we are?
Well, it's had a sensational impact, hasn't it? The internet is something that's also produced its own rafts of problems and issues and things that we never even dreamed of before. But looked at in a very positive way, it has united humanity. But having said that, humanity has always been united because we all contribute to something called the mental body of the world, consciously or unconsciously. One of the key precepts of the ageless wisdom is that everything is connected. There is one life in the universe which manifests in myriad different forms. So humanity were already joined together as it was. The internet has just made it much more easy for people to communicate across continents and to spread these ideas. So from that point of view, when used wisely and correctly, the internet has been a sensational tool.
Absolutely. I agree. And I'm thinking, as you're talking, I just wish more people could see videos like this, to read books like Everyone's Book of the Dead, because to me, this is the ultimate cure for grief, for longing for this person to come back. We've lost something, but it's a cycle. It's as night is today. I believe that if we could understand that, just think of the heartaches that could be spared, knowing that there is more to your story, that this is but a day and another day will come again tomorrow. What are your thoughts about possibly working with those who are grieving or who hold on and even skip this life because they refuse to let go of the pain?
Well, this comes down to the problem that every human being has, which is attachment. Attachment to ideas, attachment to objects, to relationships, to jobs. It can be attachments to anything, even to a football team or something like that. When people grieve, I think it's through a kind of lack of knowledge of what actually happens. Because one of the things that people are often not aware of is that although we have individualized souls and we individualize and we incarnate according to karmic necessity, each one of us belongs to soul groups. These are like families of souls, little corporations of souls who often arrange to incarnate with each other in different lives, in different roles. So in one life, I'm your father. In the next, I'm your business partner. In the next, I'm your sister, etc., etc. And we have a karmic script built on previous obligations. So this idea that we never see loved ones again can be explained to people who are grieving and say, if you've had someone in your life with whom you've had intense hatred or intense love or intense mutual interest, then in all likelihood, you have encountered this person in some previous life, maybe not in the last one or even the one before that, but at some point on your soul's journey, you may have come across this person before. We all walk down the street and see people and we just feel drawn to them, or we feel sudden antipathy without them even opening their mouths or doing anything.
Do you believe that anyone who's watching this video, do you think they're going to think that we're crazy, even though the year is 2023 and we're talking about past lives? I recognize this person from a past life. I have a bond with them. I have lived before, possibly on another planet, not Earth. Do you think that in this time, in this day and age, that we are not going to be looked at as insane? Do you think there might be more reception now?
Oh, I definitely think there will be better receptivity to this idea than, say, there would have been when I was born. I mean, then, probably fewer than 1% of people in, say, in the UK believed in reincarnation. Now, in the West, generally, somewhere between a quarter and a third of people, depending on how you phrase the question, believe that something survives death. So up to a third of people believe that there is some inner part of themselves which continues on its own journey and which eventually leads to rebirth of some kind. Obviously, some traditions believe that human beings can be reborn as trees or animals and that sort of thing. But I think certainly within the theosophical tradition and the modern interpretation of the ageless wisdom, that process, which is known as metempsychosis, is not possible. Once you've achieved individuality in the human kingdom, there you stay. You don't suddenly become an ant or a buttercup or anything.
I think it's the method of death. It's the method of what's going to be painful on your way out to exit this body. I think that frightens us. But would you say, Tim, if you knew that death was imminent, say tonight, would you be afraid? What are your thoughts if you knew it was maybe an hour away?
It wouldn't frighten me at all, because it's something I've thought about all my life, and it will come either expectedly, if I, am diagnosed with some terminal disease, or it will come in another way. But no, I'm quite aligned to the fact that I have to walk through that door at some time. But you made a very important point, Anne, and it's this process of dying which actually is, forgive the pun, the killer. Because, that's what people don't like. They don't like relinquishing dignity. They don't like losing control. So particularly if they are in a state of paralysis or something similar to that, then, this is awful. And people don't, by and large, want to suffer. Everybody would like to have, a good death, a clean death, whatever that happens to be. But obviously, our destiny and our karma dictates our deaths just as much as it dictates many parts or influences many parts of our lives. But yeah, it's this process of dying, which I think is the thing that really disturbs people more than anything else. And I'm not sure what you can do about that. I don't think there's anything you can use to alleviate that, other than to say, this is only a stage that you will go through before a period which is much more peaceful than you've enjoyed here on this physical plane on the earth.
The near-death experiences come back with these, if you look at them and run them just like you would when we contrast the religions, philosophy, and sciences, we look at the commonalities. Let's look at the commonalities of the near-death experiences. And they come back with validation that it's all going to be okay. This is a very natural thing. And now that we have the technology to bring the bodies back after a heart attack that we didn't have 50 years ago or whatever. And we also have the ability to record what takes place. There's so many of these near-death experiences that are coming. And I believe the reason they're so popular online is because they comfort. They bring a sense of comfort. And I always try to refer that to somebody who's really deeply grieving. I try to give them hope in a way. When I find out that people have passed and they don't have a big, long, painful death, I hate to say it, I'm a little envious. That sounds pretty good to me. And I wanted to ask what your thoughts were about Switzerland, or having an option to, in case you couldn't take care of yourself hygienically or whatever, and you were going to be suffering. What are your thoughts on where's the line drawn between us being able to push a button if we can't look after ourselves and suicide if we were going to avoid that in a theosophical or perennial philosophy mindset? What is your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are very clear on this, and I'm not in favor, by and large, of anything to do with assisted dying, and I'm certainly not in favor of suicide, because it should be pointed out to people that suicide has its own ramifications on the other side. And if you think that suicide is an escape from your responsibilities or your guilt or indeed anything else, then it isn't. Because if you don't go through whatever experience it was in this life, then you'll have to do it at some point in a future life. And it may be even more difficult and unpleasant at that point. So you can't duck these things. While I have every sympathy for people who, are in situations in which they have no control, or people who, despite modern analgesics, are in extreme pain all the time, I'm not in favor of ending this life, because when we come into this life, we come into it with something that people call a soul contract. We agree to be here for so long and to try and achieve certain things, our soul purpose, if you like. Many people don't ever realize what this is, but we do have a soul purpose. And if we cut that short, it means that we are in some ways turning our backs on a particular opportunity. I know these words might sound very high-handed, but I'm not in favor of this at all. People may have different views, and people may have personal circumstances where they choose this option. But personally, I hope that I'm never in a position where I would have to do that. But, I sympathize with people wanting to do it. Human beings are dignified creatures. And when you lose that dignity, you lose the biggest part of yourself.
Tim, in the near-death experiences, when they describe this beautiful, absolutely, they can't even express this pure love and compassion and understanding that they experience. They also talk about the dimensions, the change of going from the physical and transitioning. Can you talk a little bit about what you understand about this transition, even though we're going to talk about that in depth next week, about the after-death states, the dying state of the human being, what that's like?
Well, one of the really interesting things about near-death experiences, Anne, is that the commonality of features in them. And it doesn't seem to make any difference on people's cultural, religious, geographical background. These experiences are the same for all people across all cultures, and they all seem to share certain features. For example, people find themselves floating out of their body, sometimes looking down on an operating table in a hospital, and people report conversations of the surgeons and the nurses. And then people typically go down a channel or a passageway or a tube or a tunnel, and they emerge into what's usually described as light or love or something like that. And there they're sometimes met by people they know, or wise beings or family members, and they're taken on a journey. But this is a place of extreme beauty normally, and they feel it's absolutely wonderful. I mean, they might be walking with Jesus or Muhammad or Buddha, or it might be some person they don't recognize, but they will be imparted certain information. Sometimes they go through a number of different levels, maybe go to even more beautiful places. But in all of them, eventually they reach a point, a barrier, a wall, a gate, a stream, something, which prevents them from going any further. And they say to the wise person who's with them, "Why are we stopping?" And they're told, "No, this is as far as you go. Now it's your time to go back." Well, many people come back reporting that they really didn't want to come back, because this other place was much nicer than the place they'd left on the operating table or wherever. But they are told, "No, it's not your time yet. You have to go back," and the process then gets repeated. But you're right. Obviously, medical technology, which has improved massively over the last half century, has enabled more and more people to report on these experiences. But the commonality of them, and as we'll discuss in the future, their bearing on what actually happens. Because one of the other things that people often experience in near-death experience is, and what happens in the real situation, is a life review. So people see, the events of their lives, rolling backwards, and nothing is concealed. And sometimes it's portrayed to you as the effect it had on other people, for example. So, very, very interesting stuff. And I think a lot of this has contributed to changing attitudes about death.
I do see some of those who have had a near-death experience. Just because you've had one doesn't mean that you're an elevated spiritual being. I think they're kind of like report cards. So you're lucky to get a report card, but I don't think in any way it elevates you to an enlightenment. What are your thoughts on that?
No, these experiences happen to people of all persuasions, of all levels of education, at all stages in their lives. And probably if we could go back and examine the records of the past, we'd probably find them there as well. They are experiences which are very profound for people, and virtually no one comes back from these the same person. They are changed fundamentally. They are convinced that there is a spirit or something within them which is beyond the physical body and which survives physical death. They are convinced by this almost to a person. So these are amongst the most profound spiritual experiences that people have in their lives, and they're great opportunities. They may be there to tell certain people certain truths, or they may happen for reasons I'm unaware of, but they're important nonetheless,
Thank you so much, Tim Wyatt. I cannot believe we've got 3 more episodes with you. Coming up next Friday, we're going to be going in depth to the after-death state. So we've talked about, covered just briefly. If you have any questions for Tim, by the way, please leave them in the comments, and we will cover these in the upcoming episodes. Next Friday, we have got what happens in the after-death state. And the Friday after that, we're going to be going into reincarnation and karma. This is so important, so powerful. And on the 4th Friday, which is right before Halloween, we'll be talking about proof and evidence of reincarnation, which is absolutely fascinating. We could talk for hours about this, but we'll also be covering some spooks and ghosts, specters, astral shells, and so much more with Tim Wyatt on death. Now, the book that we're talking about that was inspiring all of this, that I fell in love with, this is the reason I invited him to come do this series, is called Everyone's Book of the Dead. I'm going to put it up here so you can see it. I've also got the Firewheel Books link in the show notes down below, and you'll see it here in the video as well. Everyone's Book of the Dead. I'm going to ask Tim to tell you why he chose this title really quick. Let's give a little synopsis from the author about this fantastic text. Why did you write Everyone's Book of the Dead, Tim?
Well, when I started researching death, the 2 things that I wanted to do was to, as I said earlier on, take the fear out of it, but also provide a kind of roadmap for what people can expect. Because if you're going on holiday somewhere, you want to find out a bit about the place before you get there, don't you?
Yes, you do.
So I thought, well, the Tibetans have got a Book of the Dead. The Egyptians have got a Book of the Dead. Why shouldn't everyone have a Book of the Dead?
They should. They should. And let me tell you, if you were to open the Egyptian Book of the Dead and the Tibetan Book of the Dead, they're daunting texts. But I will tell you that Tim has made this look at this. There's lots of photos, and it's easy to follow along. It's really well done, and it's incredibly affordable. It is called Everyone's Book of the Dead, and we're just touching on it, just barely touching on it. But you can find that at Firewheel Books, and we're very much looking forward to having you here with us again, Tim. This is part of the new Academy Sophia series, a new way of learning the ancient teachings, making them relatable, understandable, and applicable in our daily life. Because if we could lose the fear of death and we truly learn how to live, we can find the meaning of life. It's true, because as the morning comes, so will the night. And as birth and death, it is nature, and that is it. It's nothing personal, is it, Tim?
No, and to misquote the words of Samuel Johnson, he who is frightened of death is frightened of life.
There you go. That's a perfect way to close. Thank you so, so much. Thank you all for being here with us. And we'll be back next Friday with more Tim on death from Everyone's Book of the Dead right here on Living Theosophy. I love you guys. Thank you so much.